Hey there, chess fans. This is Camus, and presenting another obscure but hopefully entertaining game from the 1984 British Championship in Brighton. This is between Joe Gallagher and Gallagher-Johansen. At the time, Gallagher was a master, 2295, I believe was his rating then. He's in the mid-2400s now. And Johansen was 2440. He had just received his international master title. So Gallagher's the underdog here, but he does have the white pieces, and he's a pretty ferocious attacking player, as you'll see. 24, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, a6. I believe this makes it a Clamanov Sicilian. Knight c6, e takes c6, and then here's Gallagher's idea, e5. He's actually following a game, Melanyuk-Karpov, Moscow in 1983. And the idea is that although white is moving a pawn twice in the opening, he's gaining some space, perhaps preparing a kingside attack. And if black plays d6 or d5, as he probably has to, he's going to have perhaps weakened pawns and weakened dark squares. So, all in all, perhaps well worth the loss of tempo. Johansen replied queen c7, ganging up on e5, f4, d6 was played, although perhaps f6 was suggested as a possible improvement. I'm not sure about that, because after let's take a look. If f6, perhaps a queen h5, followed by g6, and I'm not so sure about black's pawn structure. This king is looking a little airy there. So maybe not f6, but this was a suggestion made. Okay, so he played d6 instead, as predicted. So we had e takes d6, bishop takes d6, and now what would you play for white here? I'll give you a second. Okay, Gallagher played knight to e4. Seems to lose a pawn, but if bishop takes f4, bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, and now not d6, check, king to e7, after which white really has nothing. Instead of knight to d6, queen to d4. And now there's a threat of knight to d6 winning the queen. So black's reply is forced. Has played e5, and then knight to d6, check. King e7, queen takes f4, e takes f4, knight takes c8, rook takes c8, bishop takes a6, and white has an excellent endgame. The 42 majority on the king side is not going anywhere for black. Meanwhile, white has a strong bishop, better development, and these three pawns are going to be a real headache for black. Anyway, back to the game. After knight to e4, Johansen must have seen this, and instead of taking on f4, he retreated his bishop to e7. Bishop d3 was played, knight to f6, queen e2. And from this position, Karpov, as black, castled and struggled. Got a very bad game. Was lucky to get the draw. In this position, Johansen played rook to b8, which is probably a mistake. Joe Gallagher seemed to think that it was not really germane to the position. He has a threat here, rook takes pawn, or putting pressure on the b file, excuse me. But Joe just castled, black castled, and now white plays b3, stopping any thoughts of hanky-panky on the b file, also developing his bishop to a strong diagonal. Okay, knight to d5 was played. Had he played knight to e4, queen takes e4, f5, stopping the threat of mate, queen e2, bishop f6, attacking the rook to b1, and white has a slight advantage here. Perhaps that would have been better than what he played. He played knight to d5, which seems okay, but okay, now in this position, Gallagher was starting to look for an attack, and he looked at bishop to b2, knight takes f4, rook takes f4, queen takes f4, rook to f1, but he decided that white really didn't get enough from this position. So after knight to d5, we'll go back, he played c4 instead. Johansen replied knight to b4, attacking the bishop. He retreated to b1, and now c5, trying to get some scope for his white squared bishop, I imagine. Now he could have played f5 here, ejecting the knight, but that would have been a mistake, because after f5, a3, now this knight is trapped, he has no retreat squares. So black's reply is forced, and now there's a threat of mate on h7, and g6 is forced, and the knight is still trapped on b4. So this is actually good for white. So instead, after bishop b1 of f5, black played c5. And now Gallagher plays bishop to b2. Now there is a threat here. You can see that. You can pick up the exchange from bishop to e5. So he plays knight to c6. Johansen plays knight to c6, defending the e5 square, but missing black's reply. Missing white's reply. In this position, f6 is probably best. And then after queen h5, that threatens knight to f6, g6, queen to h4, queen to d8, queen to f2 with pressure on the c pawn. Do we have those variations? No. White is better after the best reply here. So black is already in a bit of trouble here. So anyway, back to after bishop to b2 and the threat of winning the exchange. So knight to c6, defending the e5 square. And now I'll give you a minute to try and find Gallagher's move. Okay, he played the very attractive knight to f6 double X plan. This knight must be taken, otherwise h7 falls, and with very dire consequences. Now if he takes with the pawn, queen to g4 check happens, king to h8, queen to h4, and mate will soon happen, because as you see, the pawn on f6 is actually pinned by the dark squared bishop. And so it's a very nice little point there. So he can't take after knight to f6. He must take with bishop. Okay, so let's see here. If he plays knight to e7 in this position, hoping to plug up things with g6, then bishop e5 wins the exchange. So black is in some serious hot water here. So bishop takes f6 again, g takes f6, and now white could have played queen to g4, king to h8, queen to h4, f5, queen to f6, but that's only a draw. So here's a better move in the position after g takes f6. I'll give you a second to find it. Okay, he throws another log on the fire with bishop takes h7. And some variations here. If king takes h7, queen to h5 check, king to g7, queen to g4 check, king to h8, rook to f3, and mate is next. If he played instead, after bishop takes h7, if he plays king to g7, queen to g4 check, king to h8, rook to f3, and again, mate cannot be stopped. So after bishop to h7, he's forced to play king to h8. It's actually remarkable that he's surviving here. Gallagher played queen to h5. He's threatening mate in 2 here, withdrawing the bishop. So rook to g8. These are all pretty much forced moves for black. If he had played rook to d8, then queen to h6, cutting off the retreat square, on f8, excuse me, also threatening rook to f3, and if knight to d4, let's see, knight to d4, rook a to e1, with the threat of rook to e3 to g3, and if the further threat of bishop to g8, king takes g8, and rook to g3 mate. I hope that's clear. Alright, so after queen to h5, instead of rook to d8, he played rook to g8, which is really the only move. And now rook to f3. Now if rook to g7 in this, we have this variation. Rook to g7, rook to h3, and mate is unstoppable. So after rook to f3, instead, if you played queen to d7, rook to h3, queen to d4 check, king to h1, queen takes a1, and then bishop b1 check, blocks the threat and discovers checkmate on the black king. Well, it's not checkmate yet, but it will be after that. Okay, so it's a very nice sequence here. That's to Johansen's credit that he spotted this. It must be very difficult to defend a position like this. Anyway, so after rook to f3, he didn't do any of those things. He played e5. And this is the idea of this is to guard h3. If rook to h3, then obviously bishop takes h3. So now there's some other variations here. If he had played f5, if Joe had played f5 in this position to block up the file, then queen to d7, threatening some checks, bishop to g6 check. Well, let's see, rook to h3, queen to d4, king to f1, queen to g4, king to and then he defends by queen to g4 here. So f5 would not have been good. And let's see, we'll go back here, f5, bishop to g6, king to g7, queen to h7 check, and black runs away. So obviously a better move had to be found after e5 than f5. So Joe found that move with queen to h6. And now we go on. Rook to g7. Again, this is all forced. Rook to g3. Now, if he plays rook to h7 here, queen to f6 check, rook to g7, queen to g7 mate. So after rook to g3, he's forced to play rook takes rook. Oops, sorry about that. So after h takes g3, white is actually threatening queen to f6, king takes h7, and king to f2. And black has no checks, and the rook is coming to the h file. So if white had made the mistake, well, I'm sorry, we already have that variation. So anyway, so e takes f4 was played. This is the idea of this is to gain some checks, and white actually has to be very alert here because black's position can spring to life at any moment. This is probably the best defensive chance in the position. So e takes f4 to get these checks. Rook to e1, threatening rook to e8 mate. Now here, if there's some nice variations, if black had played bishop to e6, then bishop to g6 check, king to g8, queen to h7, king to f8, rook takes e6, f takes e6, queen takes c7, wins the queen. Okay, if instead, after rook to e1, he had played bishop to b7, then Joe had the beautiful move. Actually, see if you can find it. It's worth looking for. What would you play in this position as white? Well, hopefully you found the beautiful move, rook to e7. Interference. queen to e7, bishop to g6 check, king to g8, queen to h7 check, king to f8, and queen h8 mate. If instead of queen takes e7, he had played knight takes e7, then bishop to g6, king to g8, queen to h7, king to f8, queen to takes f7, mate. So beautiful sequence of moves there. So after rook to e1, again Johansen's finding the only moves, although he's lost at this point. Knight to e5. Joe played queen takes f6, king to h7, rook takes e5, bishop to g4. It's the only move to stop mate. Queen h4 check, king g7, queen takes g4. He could have won with queen to g5. I won't go into that. Queen takes g4, and then king to f8, and after queen h5, black resigned. If he plays king to g8, queen to g5, king to f8, queen to h6, king to g8, rook to g5 is mate. Or if he plays, after queen h5, if he plays f6, queen to h8, king to f7, queen to h7, wins the queen. Anyway, a beautiful game by Joe Gallagher, and I don't know if there was a brilliancy prize in the event, but if there were, I would think that this game would be a strong contender for it. Actually, this game made me think I should look up this line in the Taimanov. I did look it up in ChessBase, and it seems like it hasn't been played very much, and what games have been played there have looked pretty good for white. So I don't know the current state of Taimanov theory, but it certainly looks like an interesting line. Perhaps worth unearthing once again. Anyway, thank you for all your kind comments, and I hope you enjoyed this one too. And I'll have some more later. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.